So hello and welcome to the quick start guide on how to use the Blender to i3D exporter for Farming Sim 2019. As a very first quick starter, here is a quick explanation on how to actually install it. First, you have to go to the i3D Blender add-on GitHub page from Stjernes, and then basically where you can get it. You have the releases here, and then you can either get the pre-release builds that are always unstable, or this is later going to be the stable build, so uses your own you want. So we can just download the exporter zip here. It's going to save it usually your download folder. You then start Blender. Go to Edit, Preferences, Install, and then go to Download. There is the i3D exporter, and then you just enable it. On the GitHub page, also you can open issues if you find any, or if you wish for something that is not included yet. But beware, first things first, we want to make this work in the current state. So if you find any crashes or any bugs when it's not exporting, please open an GitHub. Or if you want, you can also visit the Vertex Design Discord. There is a channel where you can ask questions and usually get an answer fairly quick. So let's talk about modifiers now. This exporter, it can apply all modifiers upon export. And here are a couple of examples. This is just a standard mesh. There's no modifier on this one. This one has the mirror modifier, as you can see here. This one is not only mirrored, but it also has some array modifiers. And then this one has a subdivision modifier. There's also something that is special with this, because what we have here is a so-called linked mesh. So these two meshes are instances of each other. So if I change one mesh, as you can see here, it will also change the other mesh. So let's re-enable the subdivision modifier again. And if I simply export this file to the i3D, you have to make sure that you have apply modifiers on. And then we will simply export it, and it will create an i3D. As you can see down here, it just finished. And if we check on it, you can see here that everything is exported correctly. So it applied the mirror modifier, it applied here the mirror and the two array modifiers. It applied here the subdivision modifier, and as well it made those two unique again. This exporter can also export meshes with special smoothing. I've set up a small file here. We have a single hard shaded mesh here. We have one mesh here that is soft shaded, so completely soft, as you can see. Then we have a mesh here that has average normals, and then we have a mesh here that has face weighted vertex normals that is achieved via a modifier. You can see the result of this shading here. And then we have two special meshes over here. One is, they're both the same meshes from the geometry, just that the bottom mesh, so this one here, is also average normals, while the one on the top has face weighted vertex normals. If I enable and disable them again, you can see the difference. So this exporter also can export these kind of vertex normals, because it was made in mind with those modern ways of smoothing and also manipulating the vertex normals. So for the result, you can actually see here how this looks like, and then you can see it most visibly here how the shading drops off here. So you have this averaged face normal here, and here the top one, you can see it a little bit better, that this is perfectly flat. Or you can also see it here, how this blends into each other, while on this one, which has the average normals, the face weighted vertex normals, it is perfectly weighted. The exporter is also able to export textures. All you have to do is set them up in the correct way. So for anything that is not using a special shader, the setup is enough. So you plug the color map into the base color and the normal map into a normal map node that is also going into the normal input here. Make sure that your normal map is in the color space for non-color, otherwise it will not look good in Blender. So now we export these, and because I have the file structure set to ModHub, what it will do is it will create a folder inside here that is called textures. So I can actually show you right now in a second. So I'm exporting this, and it created me the i3D here and the textures folder. What it will also do is it will invert the roughness, so I have set it to 0.75 here. So inside of the i3D, because it still uses glossiness, it should be inverted. So you can see here there's a small rounding error, but it is 0.25. The texture is also set up in the correct way. If you want to export an object that uses a special shader like the vehicle shader, there's a couple of things you have to pay attention to. First of all, how you set up the textures. It uses no base color texture, only a specular map and a normal map. So we will plug these in right now. First of all, let's plug in the normal map. So set it to color space. Look for the normal map mode. Connect these and this one into this input. For the specular map, it's a little bit different. Get it in, you can do this via drag and drop. Go to add and look for the separate RGB node. Now plug in the color into the image, click the separate RGB, click this little arrow here and make sure to rename this to gloss map. Also, to make it a little bit more visible, change the label. This is still temporary and we're not really sure how to make this better, so if you have any suggestions, let Stjernes and me know. Now, go over to your Material tab, scroll down and you will see the i3D shader settings. You can open the vehicle shader here, so you can go to your data where you installed Farming Simulator 19, go to shaders and look for the vehicle shader. It will now open the whole shader tab where you can select your variation. So in my case, I want to do a color mask. Now I can change the materials here. So first of all, I will set the RDTs to 0 and 0, and I will make it yellow. So let's make it 0.05 in red, and oh no, let's make it full red. Make it 1, and maybe a little bit of the other colors. Since I have this set up to use the first color mat as my color that I can change. Now you can simply export it as well again, and it should automatically have set up everything inside of the giants. So if you can see here now, it has the color set up, it has the correct gloss maps also included, as well as the normal map, and it has the shader assigned here with the correct colors. As you can see here, I can add my RDTs, so my wear and my dirt. Let's take a look on how to set up merge groups in Blender with the i3D add-on. All you have to do is first of all make sure that all the materials that are supposed to be in a single merge group are sharing the same materials. So you can see here that the 3 barrels I have share the rusty barrel material. Then you go to the one that you want to be a root and name that whatever merge group name you want. Make sure you click the root of merge group checkbox, and then add the name of the merge group to the other object. Now I can simply export them and take a look in Giants editor. And as you can see here, the transform groups exported correctly. So you have the meshes here, while they're still skinned to the empty transform groups. Let's take a look now on how to set up the skinned meshes. It's a bit different than what you would expect in Maya or 3ds Max, but it's not very difficult once you get the hang of it. So I have a couple of hoses here that I want to skin so it moves together with this part right here. And you can see that I already have a bone set up right here, and I have another one right here. The trick is though, this is not just a single bone, but it is a full armature. And that is because in Blender it's very difficult to actually have bones as separate objects, or rather it is impossible. So a bone can only ever be a child of an armature. So if you just want a single bone to move around somewhere, it has to be in a separate armature. So I will show you now how to set it up and actually use it with this add-on, because this is what we think is the best approach for it. So you can see that I have root bone right here, and I have another bone right here that I simply call cedar bone. So to skin these hoses now to the bones, all you have to do is select the hoses first and then an armature, and then there is the armature deform. The best way to actually do this is just to parent it with empty groups, because what it does is, first of all, as you can see here, it sets up an armature modifier, and it also sets up a vertex group with a bone inside. So now you select the hoses again first, and then the other armature, and you do again parent with empty groups. And now you can actually clear the parent. So what you should have now is 2 vertex groups for each bone, and also 2 separate modifiers, which I will actually rename now. So this is the cedar teeth, and the other one is my root. So if we now go to the weight painting and check out the weights, I would suggest for weighting hoses like this to actually weight them manually. So you can see that I have selected a couple of vertices here, and what I will do now is, with my root bone selected, I will give them a weight of 1, and the cedar bone a weight of 0. Now we'll invert this and give the cedar bone a weight of 1 and the root bone of 0. We have to do this because Blender cannot comprehend the vertex weight of different armatures, and I can actually show you the issue of this right here. So let's just take this bit here and give this a weight of 1 for the root bone. In other programs you would now expect that it would normalize those values, so it means, like, because I have set it up here on 1 for the root bone, it would be 0 for the cedar bone. But this is not the case in Blender. Blender doesn't really understand this because it's in separate modifiers. If we would now export it, it would also not really work, because this down here now has a overall vertex weight of 2 and not 1. So what we have to do now is to mask the bones, and Blender has a feature for that we discovered. So in your armature modifier, go down here and you find the vertex group name, which influences the modifier. So here you select for the root, your root, and for the cedar, I select my cedar bone. Imagine this as a mask. So whatever is masked or weighted to this vertex group is also only influenced in this armature. So now we can actually work with this. Let's simply make it a little bit smoother. So simply using the Blender smooth function now and just smooth it off slightly. So let's say 60 iterations. Now you can see again that if I switch over to the cedar bone, it still uses the same yeah, the same vertex weight, and it's not smoothed off. And this is what I meant with Blender not understanding vertex weight. So now, since we smoothed off the root bone, we will also smooth off the cedar bone. So with the same settings, I will just click smooth again, and it should now be equal. We can actually test this now in Blender, so I will select this bone right here, go into pose mode, and I will just rotate it slightly. And we'll see that it didn't work. So let's check out why this did not work. So first of all, I will go into my modifiers, and you can see here that I did not select the bones correctly. The vertex groups, not the bones. This is the vertex group. So for the root, I will select the root, and for the cedar bone, the cedar bone. So let's try this again. Go into pose mode, and you can now see that it actually behaves as it should. And this is the limitation we have in Blender. So we can actually export this right now, but there's a slight thing that we have to remember. If we export this now as is, the armature itself would become a transform group with another transform group for the bone inside. There's a setting in the export options though, so if we go into export, you see that it's called collapse armatures. So what this does is, instead of creating first a transform group for the armature node itself, it will simply ignore it and only export the bone. So we will now click collapse armature and export this. Now let's open the i3D. Check our hoses. You can already see here that my root bone exported only as my bone and not as a full armature. So now I go into cedar, go here into my cedar, into this group, and there's my cedar bone. So if I'm moving this now up and down, you can see that the hoses are moving with it. So let me just get into a little better position. You can see that if I rotate this, they are also moving with this bone and transform group accordingly. So this is how you set up skin meshes with i3D and Blender. Now let's take a look at how the i3D mapping works. First of all, if you go into the scene properties right here, you will find that there is the i3D mapping option where you can select your XML file. What it will do is it will check your XML, so I have a very basic one here for the i3D mapping tag. Now in Blender itself, if you go over to object properties, down here you can see the add to mapping checkbox. So if we have this one ticked, all it will do is will automatically write the i3D mapping and the index nodes to the corresponding XML file. So you can see I have a couple of meshes now added to the i3D mapping. Now I will simply export it all, and what I will do is, as you can see now here, just paste them all into the XML with the correct node mapping. It is also possible in Blender to set up all your collision meshes as well as the object properties that you could also edit in the Giants editor. So on the main component, for example, you can go into the object properties here and set the rigid body type to dynamic as well as make it a compound. For implements, the collision mask is 2002, and now you see that I have several more of these collisions here. So what you should do now is make them a compound child. Also set this to 202. You can right click here and copy this to selected. It will now also copy this to all the selected pieces you had. Now, because these are compound childs, we have to make sure that they're actually a child of the main component that is also the compound. So if you want to edit or make them non-renderable, go into your object data properties and you can click here to make them non-renderable. So now I can export these. Make sure that on these main components that they also have a material, otherwise it will not export correctly. So I can open the i3d I just exported now. And if I click the main component, you can see that the main component is the correct compound dynamic, and that the collisions of the rest that we just set up are compound childs. And also, they're non-renderable. So that's it for this first quick glance and explanation of the editor. If you have any specific questions you need answered, please comment, or as I said earlier, visit the Vertex Design Discord, where you can find me under the tag @redphoenix. In the next video, we will use my mulcher that you can see here and set it up the full way to actually make it work in the Farming Simulator 2019 without editing a single thing in the Giants editor. So thank you very much for watching, and see you in the next full tutorial series.